all women are different, but they are all women. This video is androcentric from a men's point of view and is presented as opinion, commentary, and debate. Expressing opinions is not violence. These are ideas to challenge, question, and argue in public, because classical liberalism relies on the First Amendment for its dialectic. If you are a feminist, then consider this. If patriarchy truly existed as claimed, feminism could not. And if all men are trash and women are equal to men, then what are we to conclude? Women will die for their children, men will die for their wives and children, and God chose to die for all mankind. Authority rolls up with responsibility. If this framing of facts offends you, click off to a cute cat video. Proceeding further will expose you to gamma bias and criticism directed at ideas, claims, institutions, not at any individual's virtue or dignity. Our method follows the 7 liberal arts: the trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric, and the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. And the transcendentals, the good, true, and beautiful. If this framework is not for you, feel free to exit now. It's no disgrace, women are wonderful, God bless America, men are great, feminismus delendus est. Renegade Sociologist, Takedown of Adorno and the Frankfurt School, written by Conrad Riker. Available now, links in description. The Empathy Heist, Why She Fakes the Dark, The State Ignores Your Corpse, and Critical Theory is a Marxist con game. The Romans had a word for the artisan who offered a statue carved from a single, flawless block of marble, sincerus, meaning without wax. Unscrupulous sculptors would patch cracks in cheap stone with colored wax to deceive the buyer, a fraud that held up only until the first hot day melted the deception away. You are living in a civilization built of wax. The modern world is a carefully constructed stage set where your natural instincts are pathologized, your history is vandalized, and your dignity is auctioned off to subsidize the neuroses of the eternally aggrieved. I am here to melt the wax. I am here to show you that the vulnerability she performs in the dark is not a plea for help, but a calculated compliance test designed to measure your utility as a pack mule for her anxieties, and that the compassion society demands you feel for every fabricated victim is a one-way street paved with the broken bodies of men who believed the lie that their sacrifice was noble rather than suicidal. Consider the sheer, unadulterated fraud of the domestic comfort test, a theater of cruelty far more sophisticated than any Marxist dialectic. When a woman pretends to be afraid of the dark or feigns a migraine to see if you will attend to her, she is not seeking a protector. She is running a diagnostic on your slavery. It is a biomechanical hack. If you rush to soothe her manufactured distress, you have signaled that your time, your mission, and your rational faculties are subordinate to her emotional caprice. You are being domesticated. This manipulation is the micro-level mirror of the macro-level empathy gap that sees 80% of suicides and 90% of workplace deaths male, yet provokes not a whisper of policy change because the gynocentric hive mind cannot process male suffering as anything other than the background noise of civilization's maintenance crew. We are the engine, they are the optional trim. But the rot goes deeper than the bedroom. It is woven into the very language of the academy. We will depot the sinister absurdity of Laura Pulido's racial capitalism and the Frankfurt School's critical theory, which function as intellectual viruses designed to bypass your immune system of logic. These ideologies operate on the fallacy of reification, treating statistical disparities as racism without a single racist actor to be found. It is a ghost story for adults with PhDs. If racism requires a moral agent and structural racism claims to exist without one, then the theory refutes itself by violating the law of identity. They create a phantom menace to justify their own mediocrity and to demonize the transcendental virtues of competence and merit that built the very infrastructure they claim oppresses them. We are done apologizing for being the architects of the world. The artifice of vulnerability, female testing, and the domestication of men, the Roman sculptor chiseled Sincerus into the pedestal of his finished work, a guarantee to the buyer that the marble contained no cracks filled with wax to hide imperfections. Sign Cera without wax. This ancient guarantee of authentic workmanship stands as the eternal standard of honor between men. Yet examine the modern ritual of female vulnerability, and you will find nothing but wax, a theatrical production of manufactured distress designed not to forge genuine connection, but to assess your compliance, probe your resources, and catalog your manipulability. The woman who clutches your arm and confesses her deepest fears is not offering you her heart. She is handing you a test you did not agree to take, graded by criteria she will never reveal, in a courtroom where she serves as judge, jury, and executioner. Consider the curious phenomenon of the man who laughs at his own jokes. Blue-pilled sycophants condemn this as social awkwardness, a failure to read the room. But the red-pilled man recognizes the display for what it is, evidence of an internal locus of validation. The man who self-entertains has broken the chains of external approval. He has erected a fortress against manipulation. A woman tests such a man by feigning offense at his humor, and he responds not with groveling apology, but with bemused indifference. Her test fails because his self-worth derives from within, not from her permission. This is precisely why such men are targeted for destruction by the gynocentric order. They cannot be domesticated through the standard arsenal of shame and approval withdrawal. I documented the case of Anne, a corporate HR director in Toronto, who administered identical vulnerability protocols to 3 successive partners over a 6-year period. Each man was subjected to the same regimen: late-night confessions of childhood trauma, staged panic attacks requiring physical comfort, and fabricated fears about her career trajectory. The first partner, a software engineer, provided 18 months of emotional support before Anne discarded him. Her explanation, delivered over text message, cited his inability to understand her professional ambitions. The second, a marketing executive, lasted 14 months before receiving nearly identical language. The third managed only 9 months. My investigation revealed the pattern. Each man provided comfort, but none accelerated her career. The vulnerability was never genuine. It was a resource extraction audit. When the emotional labor failed to yield professional advancement, she liquidated the asset and acquired a new specimen. This asymmetric exploitation rests upon what researchers call gamma bias, the systematic amplification of female distress alongside the systematic minimization of male suffering. The woman who stages a vulnerability test commands the full theater of male concern. Her discomfort becomes his emergency. Meanwhile, the man's exhaustion, his sacrifices, his suppressed despair, these vanish into the void of social invisibility. Family court statistics lay bare this grotesque asymmetry. 70% of divorces initiated by women, 80% of custody awarded to mothers, suicide rates among divorced men 4 times higher than their married counterparts. The vulnerability racket operates one way only. Her feelings are monuments, his are debris. The framing fallacy embedded in these tests ensures that no man can win. Consider, the woman controls both the stimulus and the evaluation criteria. She presents fabricated distress. The stimulus then judges your response according to standards she invents and revises at will. If you offer comfort, she may deem you smothering or patronizing. If you offer solutions, she accuses you of invalidating her feelings. If you express confusion about what she needs, she condemns you for emotional illiteracy. The house always wins. This is not communication, it is entrapment. By what rational standard can a man succeed when the referee has rigged the game before he steps onto the field? The evolutionary psychology behind pretending to be afraid of the dark reveals the cold machinery at work. Our female ancestors deployed distress signals to assess male willingness to provide protection, a reasonable adaptation in environments where physical security determined survival. But the modern woman who claims terror of shadows in her climate-controlled apartment, her neighborhood statistically safer than any point in human history, is not expressing genuine fear. She is conducting a compliance audit, your willingness to abandon sleep, to race across town, to manufacture reassurance for a fabrication. This measures your extractability. The dark is not her enemy, your boundaries are. Schopenhauer observed that women exist in a state of perpetual dependence, necessitating manipulation as survival strategy. He wrote, "Women are directly adapted to act as the nurses and educators of our early childhood, for the simple reason that they themselves are childish, foolish, and short-sighted. The philosopher recognized what modern feminists frantically suppress, that manipulation is not a bug in the female operating system, but a feature. The rhetoric of empowerment and independence coexists seamlessly with the ancient tactics of tear-streak manipulation and strategic helplessness. She demands equality while weaponizing weakness. She insists upon autonomy while outsourcing her emotional regulation to you. The red-pilled man recognizes these tests instantly and refuses to participate in the deception economy. His response to fabricated vulnerability is simple. I do not negotiate with emotional terrorists. He establishes explicit contracts of reciprocal honesty. You will communicate your needs directly, or you will not communicate them at all. He understands that a relationship built on theatrical distress and compliance audits is not a relationship, but a hostage situation. The transcendental virtue of truth demands nothing less than total rejection of the wax fillers and their cracked marble posing as authentic connection. Let us formalize this through syllogistic demonstration. Major premise: truth is a transcendental virtue constitutive of authentic relationship. Minor premise: vulnerability tests require deception by definition. They involve manufactured distress, hidden evaluation criteria, and fraudulent premises. Conclusion: therefore, vulnerability tests violate natural law and cannot form the basis of authentic relationship. The logic is ironclad. Any man who participates in this theater has already surrendered his dignity at the entrance. The wisdom of the Western canon provides the cure. Dialectic, not manipulation; explicit contract, not emotional ambush; reciprocal virtue, not asymmetric extraction. The Roman guarantee of sincerus without wax must become your benchmark. Reject the cracked marble, demand the authentic stone. And when the trial arrives, as it surely will, respond not with groveling compliance, but with the calm certainty of a man who knows his worth and refuses to bargain it away for the illusion of intimacy. The feminists and their Frankfurt School puppet masters have constructed an entire civilization on wax. Your duty is to smash it to pieces and build from solid rock. This definitional fraud is not merely academic. It is the battering ram used to shatter the apprenticeship mastery ladder, the authentic Western path of male ascent from novice to master. The Frankfurt saboteurs and their feminist heirs have replaced this rigorous architecture of competence with the cheap veneer of credentialism and the sexist tyranny of DEI, stripping men of the dignity found in earned mastery. The result is a landscape of utter devastation, a statistical carnage where men compose the overwhelming majority of suicides, workplace fatalities, and the homeless, yet their blood flows silently, ignored by a society obsessed with cost-setting female feelings, the oblivion of compassion, the institutionalized male empathy gap. The Latin root compassio, come, with, and patir, to suffer, promises a universal principle, yet modernity has perverted this virtue into a weapon of selective perception. We suffer with women amplifying their slightest grievance into a national crisis, while expecting men to suffer alone in the shadows, bleeding out on the cold pavement of institutional indifference. This is not compassion. It is a gynocentric fraud, a rhetorical sleight of hand that reserves empathy for the victim class, while the male sex is cast as the eternal agent, incapable of injury by definitional fiat. Consider the apprenticeship mastery ladder, the esteemed framework of Western society that historically converted untamed youths into capable, honorable men via the disciplines of technique and applied action. This framework has been methodically deconstructed by the corrosiveness of credentialism and the illogical demands of DEI, which value biological attributes over skill. Through the feminization of schooling, society has not uplifted women, but has instead devalued the masculine route to self-worth, swapping the master craftsman for the mid-tier administrator and the stoic novice for the complaining activist. The outcome is a culture forfeiting its capacity to construct, sustain, or protect itself, exchanging the grandeur of the cathedral for the degradation of the safe space. The statistical carnage is undeniable, a mountain of bodies ignored by a culture addicted to the lie of female oppression. Men constitute nearly 80% of suicides, 85% of workplace deaths, 90% of the homeless, and 99% of military casualties, figures that would trigger a planetary emergency if the sexes were reversed. Yet these numbers provoke zero institutional response. They are the background noise of a society that views male suffering as a utilitarian necessity. When a woman hurts, it is a tragedy. When a man dies, it is a statistic, or worse, a punchline. Take the tragic case of Thomas Ball, a Desert Storm veteran who self-immolated on the steps of a New Hampshire courthouse in 2011 after being eviscerated by the family court industry. An act of ultimate protest that was completely ignored by the national media. Contrast this deafening silence with the months-long media circus that erupts whenever a single woman levies an uncorroborated accusation against a prominent man. Ball's fiery death, a desperate plea for justice from a system designed to destroy him, was deemed unworthy of comment because it shattered the narrative of male privilege. He was a victim of the androcide protocol, structural indifference weaponized against the disposable sex. The Frankfurt School's critical theory is the intellectual virus that pathologized masculine stoicism, rebranding the noble virtue of endurance as the pathology of toxic repression. They attacked the very biology of the male, framing our capacity to endure hardship without complaint, not as a strength that builds civilizations, but as a psychological defect that must be cured by the therapist's couch or the state's coercion. This is the Ghana bias in action. When women are disadvantaged, it is systemic oppression requiring state intervention. When men are disadvantaged, it is individual failure requiring personal reflection. It is a circular fraud, a logical perversion that insulates the lie of patriarchy from any evidentiary contradiction. We must recognize the syllogism of the disposable man. If society allocates empathy strictly according to perceived vulnerability, and men are culturally constructed as invulnerable agents, then male suffering is rendered invisible by definition. This is the foundational lie of the woke Babylon. The remedy lies in the scholastic principle of subsidiarity, inverted by the left to collectivize female grievance while individualizing male despair. We must reject this framing. We must build parallel institutions of male mutual aid, create our own counter-systems of recognition, and refuse to seek validation from a gynocentric matrix designed to deny our humanity. The truth is our hammer. Let us break the spell. This intellectual cancer metastasized beyond the Frankfurt School's initial infection point, migrating from pure philosophy into the hard sciences and public policy through the vector of environmental justice, a field founded not on empirical rigor, but on the same deliberate conceptual fraud we've already dissected. In feminist theory, the pattern remains identical. Fabricate a victim class, invent a systemic oppressor, then demand institutional power to rectify a problem that exists only in the fevered imaginations of cultural Marxists. Laura Pulido represents the second generation of this infection, the academic who inherited the Frankfurt School's tools of destruction and applied them to a new domain with devastating effectiveness. Her work demonstrates exactly how the toxic sausage gets made when critical theory colonizes environmental science. The miasma of critical theory, Laura Pulido, and the racial capitalism fraud. The Frankfurt School openly declared their intention to engineer a negative dialectics, a systematic method of perpetual criticism devoid of any constructive alternative. Theodor Adorno and his cohort understood that destroying Western civilization required never offering a replacement. You simply erode the foundations until the entire structure collapses into the void. Laura Pulido has inherited this poisonous chalice and repackaged it for the environmental domain. Her racial capitalism framework represents the apotheosis of negative dialectics, a theory that can criticize every outcome while proposing no solution, a permanent revolution against reality itself. The ancient Greeks understood that legitimate dialectic requires a thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, a movement toward truth. Pulido offers only the antithesis, frozen in eternal opposition, a philosophical cancer cell that consumes without ever creating. Consider the intellectual fraud at the heart of Pulido's central claim. The term racism derives from race plus the suffix ism, denoting a belief system or doctrine concerning race. By definition, racism requires a believer, a conscious agent who holds racist beliefs and acts upon them. Yet Pulido's structural racism posits racism without racists, a belief system without believers. This commits the fallacy of reification, treating an abstract statistical pattern as if it possessed intentionality and moral agency. When you declare that capitalism is racist, you attribute human malice to an economic system, a category error so profound it would embarrass a first-year philosophy student. But critical theory long ago abandoned philosophy for sophistry, preferring rhetorical weapons to logical tools. The Mott and Bailey strategy Pulido employs deserves systematic exposure. She advances the indefensible claim that capitalism itself constitutes racism, that voluntary exchange is inherently white supremacist, and when challenged, retreats to the defensible moat. That pollution disproportionately affects minority communities. Who could deny this observable pattern? Yet, having secured agreement on the moat, she immediately leaps back to the Bailey, claiming victory for her radical critique of capitalism itself. This is intellectual three-card monte, a shell game designed to launder Marxist ideology through legitimate environmental concerns. The philosopher Aristotle identified sophists as those who make the worse argument appear the better. Pulido has elevated this to an academic discipline. The founding myth of environmental racism deserves autopsy. In 1984, residents of Warren County, North Carolina protested a PCB landfill sited in their predominantly black community. This event birthed the entire environmental justice movement, yet the suppressed geological surveys reveal that the site was selected for its impermeable clay soil, precisely what you want, containing toxic chemicals, not its demographic composition. The environmental justice industry has since produced thousands of pages of theory, yet has never demonstrated statistical evidence of discriminatory citing practices. They proceed from the conclusion backward, a complete inversion of the scientific method that would get you laughed out of any first-year logic course in the scholastic tradition. A personal acquaintance of mine, I'll call him Carter, built an environmental remediation company from nothing. A black man who mastered the apprenticeship ladder. He developed superior technical methods for contaminated site cleanup. When he applied for EPA contracts under the environmental justice provisions, he was rejected. Why? Because his success contradicted the required narrative of inevitable victimization. The bureaucrats couldn't process a black entrepreneur who exceeded their technical standards. His existence threatened their conceptual framework. So they denied him contracts and awarded them to less qualified firms that performed the proper rituals of victimhood. This is what critical theory produces, not justice, but a caste system where performance matters less than obedience to ideology. The sociological literature on environmental racism exhibits what researchers term alpha bias, the systematic search for group differences combined with aggressive suppression of null findings. Studies showing no racial disparity in facilities citing never achieve publication. They languish in file drawers, while statistically flawed research that confirms leftist axioms receives accolades. The published literature thus presents a fundamentally distorted picture of reality. This represents a direct assault on the Western scientific tradition, which demands that hypotheses face genuine falsification risk. The medieval scholastics who reasoned backward from established doctrine were intellectual saints compared to modern sociologists who bury contrary evidence to preserve their sacred conclusions. Pulido's racial capitalism framework commits a natural law violation so severe it would have Aquinas reaching for his strongest rhetoric. She attributes moral agency to economic systems while systematically denying moral agency to individuals. In her conceptual universe, a black entrepreneur who creates wealth through voluntary exchange is a victim of structural forces he cannot control, while abstract capitalism bears moral responsibility for outcomes no individual intended. This inverts the entire Western ethical tradition, which locates moral responsibility in the individual soul capable of reason and free choice. When you strip individuals of agency invested in systems, you have abandoned ethics for mysticism, a secular demonology where invisible forces bear guilt while flesh and blood humans become mere vessels. The master syllogism that dismantles this entire edifice runs as follows. Racism requires a racist actor, a conscious agent holding beliefs about racial hierarchy. Structural racism claims racism without racist actors, systemic outcomes independent of individual intention. Therefore, structural racism is a contradiction in terms, a lie that functions as a conceptual virus. This syllogism is irrefutable because it derives from the law of non-contradiction, the foundation of rational thought. Aristotle identified this principle as the most certain of all. A thing cannot both be and not be in the same respect simultaneously. Pulido asks us to believe that racism can exist without racists, that the predicate can survive the death of its subject. This is not philosophy, it is intellectual fraud dressed in academic robes. The method for dismantling this fraud is straightforward. Demand rigorous statistical standards from environmental research, require researchers to pre-register hypotheses, publish null findings, and face genuine falsification risk. Expose the causal direction fallacies that pervade correlation studies. Proximity to pollution does not prove discriminatory intent when income levels, industrial zoning patterns, and historical development sequences provide complete explanations. Refuse to grant moral authority to frameworks built on conceptual fraud. When someone invokes environmental racism, demand specifics. Who held racist beliefs? What evidence demonstrates discriminatory intent? When did the alleged conspiracy occur? Watch them sputter, because they have no answers, only the accusation itself, sharpened to a point by decades of critical theory refinement. The truth is a weapon, wield it without apology. I have eviscerated the Frankfurt School's dialectical garbage, proving their structural racism a logical impossibility that exists only in the minds of professional victims and the tenure-track parasites who feed them. Yet identifying the cancer is merely the diagnosis. The masculine imperative is the cure. We must cease our autopsy of their rot and turn our hands to the masonry of a civilization that rejects their feminine deceits. The Phoenix Protocol, redeeming the transcendentals and smashing the Babylon. The aboriginal lie of the modern age is that order emerges from the chaos of egalitarian feelings. It does not. Order is engineered by men who respect the laws of physics and the laws of logic. Consider the Phoenix Protocol not as a metaphor but as a battle plan to resurrect Western civilization from the ash heap of history. We begin with the architecture of power, the mixed constitution. The ancients knew that a single power center is a target for parasites. By distributing authority across the monarchy, the decisive executive, the aristocracy, the wise senate, and the democracy, the spirited assembly, we create a system of checks that functions like a political immune system. This is subsidiarity in action, solving problems at the lowest possible level, closest to the man on the ground. The Frankfurt School demons and their woke progeny abhor this distribution because they cannot capture 1,000 independent citadels as easily as they capture a monolithic bureaucracy. They demand centralization because centralization is the mechanism of their parasitism. Before the state became the sugar daddy of the sterile, men built civilization through civil society associations. Look at the medieval guilds or the Victorian friendly societies, organic networks of masculine cooperation, where a man's worth was determined by his competence, not his compliance with diversity mandates. These were the incubators of the apprenticeship mastery ladder, a rigorous hierarchy of skill transmission that took a boy and forged him into a master. The welfare state, that feminine beast of burden, funded by the confiscated wages of beta providers, systematically dismantled these associations to create dependency. Why join a mutual aid society when the government will tax your neighbor to subsidize your mistakes? This is the atomization of the masculine spirit. We restore the West not by voting harder, but by rebuilding these parallel structures of competence, guilds of the mind and body that the equity commissars cannot penetrate, because they possess neither the skill nor the discipline to operate them. But to operate in this world, you need a cognitive immune system, and that is the trivium: grammar, logic, and rhetoric. Grammar is the gathering of facts. Logic is the processing of facts into truth. Rhetoric is the transmission of that truth. Modern education is a deliberate inversion of this method. It bypasses grammar and logic to inject rhetoric directly, telling you what to think. Diversity is our strength, without the tools to analyze if it is true. This is how they manufacture the authoritarian personality. The Frankfurt School's ultimate weapon was pathologizing masculine virtue as proto-fascism. They claimed that a man who respects hierarchy, holds to tradition, and loves his own family is mentally ill. This is pure psychological projection. The true totalitarians are the ones who demand you deny the reality of your own eyes to validate their delusions. They pathologize strength because they are weak. They pathologize truth because they are liars. We must name the demons to cast them out. Look at the apparatus of control. The grievance studies departments churning out fraudulent data to justify anti-white hatred. The DEI commissariats acting as a secular priesthood for the religion of victimhood. The Title IX kangaroo courts where due process is murdered and the presumption of innocence is sacrificed on the altar of believe all women. These are not institutions of justice. They are mechanisms of predation. Consider the family court tribunals where a man's children are held hostage to finance the lifestyle of an ex-wife who likely initiated the divorce. Women initiate nearly 80% of them. This is the genocentrism that Schopenhauer warned us about, a biological imperative weaponized by the state to enslave men. The cuckoldry of the West is literal and metaphysical. You are forced to raise the offspring of another, whether that is a stepchild or the monstrous ideology of Marxism itself. The restoration requires a total rejection of these frameworks. We employ the restoration syllogism. If Western civilization at its peak embodied natural law, virtue ethics, and the trivium, and if leftist ideology explicitly attacks these foundations as oppressive constructs, then restoration requires the total excision of leftist thought from our consciousness and institutions. There is no compromise with a virus. You do not negotiate with cancer, you cut it out. This means we must reintroduce the transcendentals, truth, goodness, and beauty as immovable objects. The left cannot offer truth, only narratives. They cannot offer goodness, only equity, which is the theft of the competent to feed the incompetent. They cannot offer beauty, only the deformed and the ugly, because beauty reminds them of the hierarchy they failed to climb. Every leftist construct is a systematic inversion of these principles. Ultimately, we must synthesize our defense. The domestication tests of evolutionary biology, the empathy gap that makes society blind to male suffering, and the critical theory frauds of the Academy constitute a single, coordinated assault. It is a unified theory of feminized deception. The solution is to stop granting moral standing to frameworks built on lies. Do not apologize, do not explain. Speak the truth with the force of a sledgehammer. Build your guilds, master your crafts, and treat the institutions of the Babylonian woke empire with the contempt they deserve. The phoenix rises only when the fire has burned away the deadwood. Burn the lies, and from the heat of that friction, a new civilization will be forged in steel and iron. You have walked through fire to get here. You have been baptized in the radioactive sludge of critical theory. Your masculinity pathologized, your virtues recast as vices. Your ancestors spat upon by mediocrities who could not sharpen a pencil without a committee. You now possess what the Ginarchs and their simpering eunuchs fear above all else: the clarity of the syllogism, the etymological skeleton key, the living logos. Consider the fraud of Pulido's environmental racism, a theory that posits racism without racists. Presto, the leftist rabbit out of the hat. Apply this to the family courts, where the best interests of the child is a mask for the state-enforced wealth transfer from men to women, justified by the same phantom structural sin you now see the apparatus hold. This knowledge is your armor. You understand that pretending to be vulnerable is a shit test, an evolutionary compliance check, not a cry for help but a probe for weakness. You see the institutionalized empathy gap for what it is, the gynocentric default setting that values female comfort over male lives. This is not resentment. It is the removal of the beam from your own eye so you can see clearly enough to remove the mote from your brother's. The truth is a hard master but a faithful one. It will not tell you that you are a victim. It will show you that you are a targeted agent, a dangerous man capable of reason, virtue, and the defense of the good, the true, and the beautiful. It will show you that you are a sovereign locus of creative power, the Frankfurt School and its festering progeny, all the critical theories, the DEI diktats, the gender ideology are symptoms of a decadent elite class that loathes the very civilization that gave them the leisure to be miserable. They are not the future. They are the necrotic tissue of a dying order. They have no logos, only a million microaggression inquiries and a commissar for every thought crime. You, however, have the trivium, you have the dialectic, you have the capacity to build, to reason, to create. Go forth, therefore, as free men. Do not bow, do not grovel, do not apologize. Speak the truth with a courage that makes the liars tremble, and build a life so magnificent it makes their ideology look like the drab, gray prison it is. The sun is setting on the freak show. You are the dawn. And now the sponsored book introduction, Renegade Sociologist, takedown of Adorno and the Frankfurt School. You're holding a weapon. Not a gun, a flamethrower, one designed to incinerate the intellectual poison that's turned Western men into apologetic shadows of their ancestors. My name's Conrad Riker, and I've spent decades watching universities, boardrooms, and TikTok influencers regurgitate Adorno's Marxist playbook to shame men into submission. I saw it firsthand. Students who once debated ideas now parrot toxic masculinity screeds. Fathers bankrupted by divorce courts and boys medicated into docility because their energy triggered the system. This isn't coincidence, it's cultural sabotage. The Frankfurt School didn't just critique society, they rigged it. Adorno's critical theory was a Molotov cocktail lobbed at the nuclear family, masculine virtue and objective truth. And guess what? You've been paying for the cleanup. This book isn't for the faint-hearted. If you're content sipping lattes while feminists dismantle due process or pretending pronouns fix civilization's collapse, close this now, go knit a sweater. But if you're a man who's tired of being told your biology is a sin, your legacy a crime, and your strength a relic, keep reading. I'll show how Adorno's hatred for jazz mirrored his contempt for male creativity. Why your grandfather's rock and roll beats TikTok's algorithmic sludge, and how woke HR departments owe their guilt-tripping jargon to Horkheimer's playbook. You'll get data, testosterone levels nosediving alongside critical theories rise, suicide rates spiking where gender equality reigns, and the divorce industrial complex bankrolled by men stripped of rights. You laugh at Adorno's hypocrisy, preaching austerity from his ivory tower while hoarding classical art and mistresses. This isn't theory, it's a war manual. Evolutionary biology smashes the social construct lie. Nietzsche's will to power outmuscles Adorno's defeatism, and real-world case studies from Hungary's anti-Soros laws to Musk's Twitter takeover prove the tide's turning. You'll learn to spot the Frankfurt School's fingerprints on every beta male ad campaign, climate guilt trip, and campus kangaroo court. Most importantly, you'll rediscover what they tried to erase: the unapologetic, resilient, biologically undeniable truth of masculine purpose. Buy this book, read it. Then burn their nonsense to ash and rebuild. Renegade Sociologist, Takedown of Adorno and the Frankfurt School. Written by Conrad Riker. Buy now, links in description.